Hello, good night, and thank you for joining us today. My name is the Reverend Angel Luis Rivera-Agosto, and I serve as the Community Engagement Senior Coordinator for Justice Initiatives for the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the U.S. and Canada. A general ministry of the Disciples Church, the nonprofit National Benevolent Association, or NBA by its acronym, collaborates with leaders and health and social service organizations to strengthen and transform communities through compassion, healing, and justice. The NBA provides education, companionship, inspiration, and resources for organizational and leadership development for health and social service ministries. All of our work with partners is grounded in our historic mission of justice and advocacy. As we get started, I would like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on our website as well as our NBA YouTube channel. So please connect to www.nbacares.org. You may also follow along via automated transcription using the AI-generated captions. So look for the CC button at the top of the bottom of your Zoom window. So today's topic is Voices of Democracy After 2024 Elections, a path to discernment and prophetic action. Our objective in this webinar is to invite participants to a process of discernment and wisdom around the reading and understanding of the electoral process and its outcomes. So the result of these elections is complexities, challenges, and opportunities for prophetic action regarding justice and the well-being of the people. How can we identify these signs of challenge and hope? How can we act as citizens and people of faith in the face of the political panorama these next 4 years have in store for us? What are the alternatives to affirm hope and to act according to this in our ministries and places of mission? So let me put ourselves into context. There is the impression that the results of these elections have been kind of contradictory if we compare them at the federal level and those of the states and localities. Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, by way of example, even surveyed to understand how voters supported her on the one hand and then Donald Trump on the other. Both politicians, that represent different poles in the political and social future of the country. Likewise, interesting and challenging results have been generated between the elected political personalities in the local and in the state level. So, how can we match these different results from the federal place to the state and localities? But also, there has been different referendums and consultations about themes that are very much into the needs of the people. Specific themes that have been consulted, and then out of these consultations, we have seen people affirming reproductive rights. For example, 7 out of 11 states that call for a referendum for reproductive rights, to affirm reproductive rights, they were approved. Also, 6 states sought to update minimum wages and require paid sick leave laws. 4 states affirm public education, among other aspects. And with the president approving executive orders, maybe conflicting with specific rights affirmed in those referendums, or possibly violating fundamental rights and curtail aid and programs that benefit large segments of the population, we must develop a critical reading of these results and from there to affirm democracy and the prophetic action of our churches, partners, and communities. How do we analyze this? What is before us? So at the end of this presentation, we will try to make time for questions. Throughout the webinar, if you have questions that emerge, we welcome you to use the Q&A feature by clicking on the icon at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions. Please include your email address so if we cannot answer your question during the webinar, we can follow up with you directly after the webinar. You may also use the Q&A or chat features to request technical assistance during this webinar. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on nbacares.org in the coming weeks. Now, please let me share my joys to introduce my dear friend and colleague who will share the conduction of this webinar with me. So the Reverend Dr. Elyse Berry is the Associate for Advocacy and Leadership Development of the Council of Health and Human Service Ministries of the United Church of Christ. Before this role, she was the postdoctoral fellow in bioethics at the Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine and a board-certified hospital chaplain in the Cleveland Clinic. So, Reverend Berry is an ordained minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, a spiritual director, an Enneagram teacher, and also a poet. She feels most alive when connecting others to the sacred sounds within and around them and finding healing in pursuing justice. Elyse will share a brief greeting with you and she will introduce our speakers for the webinar. So welcome, Elyse, and please, the word is yours.
Yes, thank you, Angel Luis, and good evening. Hello, everybody that has joined us for this call. I'm so grateful. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to say a note of how excited I am that we're having this beautiful collaboration of the Disciples of Christ and the United Church of Christ coming together to share in our justice work, to collaborate, to work smarter, not harder, and to do all this work together. So I am just feeling very grounded and grateful in this collective effort. And with that, it is my honor and privilege to introduce our two speakers for this evening's discussion. Abigail Cipparone is the policy advocate for domestic issues in the United Church of Christ DC Office of Public Policy and Advocacy. Formerly a legislative director in the House of Representatives, Abigail now works with Congress and the administration to advance the UCC's vision of a just world for all. Abigail's policy portfolio includes issues of democracy and elections, and in that capacity, she worked on the UCC's Our Faith, Our Vote campaign last election cycle, including authoring the Don't Be Scared, Be Prepared election scenario toolkit and coordinating the creation of the Countering Project 2025 with Love, a UCC response resource. Good evening, Abigail, and thank you for being with us tonight. I'd also like to introduce the Reverend Jesse Jackson Jr., who is the proud pastor of the East 6th Street Christian Church in Oklahoma City, serving in that congregation for 28 years. He is a native of Jackson, Mississippi, and holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from Murray State University in Murray and a master's degree in divinity from Phillips Theological Seminary in Oklahoma. His activism has taken him to state capitals and the nation's capital. He traveled with a delegation of ministers to Palestine and Israel to meet locals and search for strategies for Middle East peace. He has also traveled to the deserts of Arizona and Mexico to study border theology, Ghana and West Africa as well. He joined others for the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, the March from Selma to Montgomery. At home, he is the convener of Occupy the Corners, OKC, a collective that works to end gun violence in Northeast Oklahoma City. A member of several boards and organizations, as well as the former president of the National Convocation of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada. My goodness. We have some pretty stellar backgrounds and expertise with us this evening. And with that, I give it back to you, Angel Luis.
Share the same joy as you, Elyse, because I feel so privileged to have these two wonderful people, you know, being here and working in the prophetic stance of the church from the pew to Washington, D.C. So welcome, and it's a joy to have you, Reverend Jesse Jackson and Abigail.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, and thank you, Elyse, for this presentation. So for this first round of discussion, both speakers will have 10 minutes each for 20 minutes in total. To answer this question, Reverend Jackson, how has the election result been assumed in the pews, in the church? How is it being processed at the local level? And how, Abigail, has the election been considered at the federal level, taking into account what I just discussed in the introduction of this webinar? Please.
Well, first of all, thank you all for this opportunity. I'm so glad to have this opportunity to talk about this. This is something that we speak about on a weekly basis at East 6th Street here in Oklahoma City and through social media. And to be honest, there has been a collective pall on not only our congregation, but on many of our communities, many of our allies throughout the city and throughout this nation. And here in Oklahoma, which is deeply red, all 77 counties have gone for President Trump. And they haven't gone for Democrats since 1964, I believe. And so it's thoroughly red. Our delegation, thoroughly MAGA. They're not Republicans. We don't have Republicans in Oklahoma. We have MAGA. It's MAGA on steroids here in Oklahoma. And so it is what it is. But let me just state from the outset that my policies are guided by a Palestinian itinerant rabbi from Nazareth. That's where everything is. Someone who was nurtured in the prophetic traditions of the Hebrew prophets and spoke truth to power, even at the pain of costing them their own life. I'm also a fifth generation preacher from the state of Mississippi. And all that's in my blood and all that helps to make up who I am. So I was born into and given life by the Black church that emerged out of the nightmare of chattel slavery. And so my faith and my politics put me squarely at odds with empire most of the time. And so while some Caesars are better than others, we can never mistake Caesar for being anything other than Caesar. He is who he is. And Caesars do what Caesars do. So please allow me to back up for about 8 years here. I was not prepared for the first Trump presidency. My confession is that I, like many others, had hoped that the hate-filled agents of chaos and were maintained on the fringes of our politics, but to our surprise, they were given the keys to the kingdom. And because of that disappointment and the change of the tone and the tenor of this nation, I went into a depression, which is a bad news. It's a bad thing when a person that's supposed to be engaged in giving good news is in a depression and needs good news himself. And if you preach long enough, you're going to preach through a storm. And certainly I was in a storm during that time, partly because of what I call an Obama hangover that I think that most of this nation went through. Everything in the first Trump presidency seemed to be a reversal of everything that happened in the Obama administration. And many of us only knew Trump as a celebrity. We didn't know Trump because he was not a politician. We did not know how petty and childish that he could be at times. We were surprised at how cruel and vindictive he could be as well. And so while we can debate whether or not change during the Obama years was real or imagined, what cannot be disputed is that with the Obama election, many people believed that we had turned a corner. And we kind of sort of turned the corner, but we turned down the cul-de-sac. We turned down the cul-de-sac of hate-filled and greed-induced policies that did not put Americans first, but put a small percentage of wealthy elites first, and they continued to get more wealthy and more elite. And so with both Trump administrations, what they have proven to us is that our nation cannot be trusted to keep its promises to its citizens or its promises to its allies. things and policies that we believe were institutionalized, we believe that were set and done, are now subject to cancellation. You know, times that we thought we would never have to revisit, you know, look, we're now operating from the standpoint that anything given to you, say for instance, voting rights or citizenship even, can be taken away at any time. And so although I was personally disappointed at the electoral outcome in 2024, I was determined to approach it from a completely different standpoint than I did 8 years ago. And so the congregation that I pastor is mostly, though not exclusively, African American, and it's mostly, though not exclusively, Democratic. So without ever having to tell people how I stand on the situation or how I vote on the situation, they pretty much know who I am. And so, guided by the gospel of Jesus, inside of the 66 book canon that we have, I have a canon within a canon that guides everything that I do. And one of the scriptures is Matthew 5:9 that says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called the sons and daughters of God." And I also have Matthew 22, which says that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and your strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. With that as my core, I ask myself, how did those before me not only survive but thrive and strive during these times that were difficult, more difficult than I live through right now? How did they respond when the law and the courts were not on their side and were not their friends? How did they survive when public opinion was not even on their side? And so my friend and colleague, Dr. William Barber, has reminded us that every move of progress in the United States, particularly for African Americans, has been met with a backlash. After the Civil War, Reconstruction gave us the Freedmen's Bureau and the Justice Department. It gave us the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But then you had the great betrayal of the election of 1876, when a Republican in the North made a corrupt deal with Democrats in the South. And Reconstruction came to a screeching halt in 1877. And then slavery by another name was born. Convict leasing and sharecropping, the birth of Jim Crow. In 1954, you had the Supreme Court decision that separate but equal was unconstitutional with Brown versus the Board of Education. Then you had the Montgomery bus boycott that kicked off the modern civil rights movement. But then you had the emergence of the solid majority of Richard Nixon that gave birth to the Reagan Revolution, that gave birth to the modern conservative movement, that gave us the Tea Party and the Birther movement, and now MAGA. And the election of Barack Obama was a watershed moment for many in this nation, but now we're living in the backlash of that with a second Trump term. So trying to discern how my ancestors survived led me to one of my favorite periods of time in American history, the Harlem Renaissance. The 1920s was really a Charles Dickens kind of moment for most African Americans. It was the best of time and it was the worst of times. And so neither the laws or the courts were sympathetic to the needs of people. And since we were caught in this purgatory of trying to prove how loyal we were to a country that obviously was not loyal back, from Christmas addicts to Afghanistan, folks have died to prove their love for a nation that did not love them back, quite honestly. But in Harlem, there was a spirit of defiance. There was a spirit of creativity. There was a spirit of love. And I believe that our fight must begin with love. Love of God, then love of our neighbor. And neighbor has never been bound by geography. Our family is global, but so is our struggle. Here's the thing that we have now. We've all been fighting our own separate battles from our own separate enclaves. You have African Americans fighting here. You have Latinos fighting here. You have gay and lesbian brothers and sisters fighting here. You have these people speaking for these folks and these people speaking for these folks. What I believe needs to happen right now is, since we're all fighting the same demon, we all need to get from the same team and begin to fight together. Because quite honestly, your fight affects me. We can no longer do this thing where we compartmentalize everything and try to fight this ourselves. We're outnumbered by this demon that we fight, and I believe that it is an otherworldly thing, because I don't think that we fight against flesh and blood. I do think that we fight against principalities and things that are beyond what we are as human beings. But what we have seen throughout the history of the United States and throughout the history of humankind is that when humans get together, we have more in agreement. We have more in common than we do that separates us. And I preached the sermon last year, and I talked about the things that separated people in terms of race, and the difference between a race is infinitesimal. It's infinitesimal. We are basically the same folks. We are related. We are together, and we've got to move together, which means your fight has to become my fight, and my fight has to become your fight.
That's because we are here. We are trying to share the way we feel, the way we are challenged to act, and I am reminding the original introduction that I shared. You know, people voted in seems in ways that seem to be contradictory. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Donald Trump, both of them were seen as anti-establishment. So
Yes.
what is the kind of message that the people are sending to us in the churches, to the government itself, the structures, maybe that at one time were affected the way of the people. This arrangement that you mentioned, Pastor Jesse, when they failed to continue the reconstruction process that this country was living at that moment. So, Abigail, how about the Washington, D.C. scenario? How can you define it at this moment, please?
Yeah. And I just also want to lift up Rev Jackson's comments. I think particularly related to the importance of viewing our neighbors with love and working through love is something that really moves me. I know the United Church of Christ's Our Faith, Our Vote campaign this past year, their theme was vote with love. And I think as we move into this new era, I think we can expand that, right? Vote with love, protest with love, call your senator with love. And I think that's going to get us there. Love is what glues us all together. So yeah, I think here in DC, I know the presidential election seems like such a long time ago, but we are definitely feeling the impact of it every single day. So I know that what is I think affecting my day-to-day the most here in Washington, D.C. is President Trump's mass firings of nonpartisan civil servants, particularly all of those who work in the federal government. Many of my colleagues that I work with on issues of healthcare, housing, the environment, and protecting vulnerable communities, which are all priorities of the United Church of Christ, are federal government employees that have now been fired without any prior notice and no opportunity for severance. And these are people who have spent decades keeping our water clean in the Environmental Protection Agency, or doing groundbreaking disease research at the Department of Health and Human Services, or protecting all of us from bank fraud at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. These folks have also spent decades advocating for women at the United States Agency for International Development. But unfortunately, there have been more impacts of this election than what I see most closely in my day-to-day. As just a quick review for everyone on the call, the administration has attacked national parks, with the White House releasing an executive order opening up public lands to oil drilling. It's attacked the LGBTQ community, with the administration prohibiting trans members of the military from serving and preventing military families from receiving gender-affirming healthcare. It's attacked underrepresented groups, including people of color, women, the LGBTQ community, disabled folks, by shutting down diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and practices that ensure fair hiring and school admissions. And we are also personally, as part of the UCC, reeling from the pause of refugee resettlement and asylum programs that is in violation of international humanitarian law. Our immigrant neighbors now can't attend church or go to the hospital or even send their kids to school without fear of an ICE raid. And unfortunately, we've even been hearing reports of ICE making mistakes and even detaining U.S. citizens. So I think a
Yes.
lot of people in DC, particularly in the policy community, were expecting many of these attacks, and we were expecting them to come swiftly. But I think that what we weren't really prepared for, and I think where I know our community is really trying to start to strategize, is the lengths that the administration would go with violating the very constitutional responsibilities that a president has. I know that the firing of mass amounts of federal workers is without proper cause is actually unconstitutional. The stoppage of federal funds when Congress is in charge of the federal budget, not the president, is also unconstitutional. The detention of US citizens is unconstitutional. And now there's reports of the president failing to comply with court orders for recent cases that have been filed against the administration, including the order that he release all federal spending that was currently paused. And currently he is failing to comply. And so while we have three branches of government that are meant to provide checks and balances, we're asking ourselves, particularly in the federal space, what happens when one branch of government, Congress, is so gerrymandered and voter suppressed that its majority still supports a president that openly defies the Constitution, and then the other branch of government, the judiciary, that currently must uphold recent Supreme Court rulings, one of which gives the president broad immunity from prosecution. And so unfortunately, the Trump administration is currently acting as if there's this blank check to undermine the power of the judiciary, to undermine the power of Congress, and to officially dismantle the regulatory powers that the federal government once had. And so I think our perspective in DC has changed from we're expecting these swift attacks on people towards how do we shore up our institutions and where do we go from here? And so I'm really excited for this conversation, particularly because I know that the wisdom of the people on the ground, of our local leaders, are the ones that we have been leaning on the most in these times. And so I just want to thank everyone for letting me be on the call, and I hope to learn from you as much as I can hopefully update you from the DC landscape.
Because we're not necessarily saying that the country do not need changes. It's important for people to have the notion that changes are needed to improve the well-being of society. But we have a constitutional system. We have separation of powers. We have three different branches of government, each one of them creating this balance necessary in every democracy. What we are seeing maybe is the unbalance of the balance that the framers of the U.S. Constitution created. So what does it mean now for prophetic action, this situation that we're facing? And I am seeing some of the comments from the people, James Seymour, the whites in the U.S. abandoned Reconstruction and Black rights out of a misguided sense of unity. Or maybe Mary Jo Bradshaw saying that is concerned about her family, friends, and neighbors. Or even Melanie Dye saying that she's turning 65 in July and can't reach anyone at Medicare. So these are the kind of challenges that we have at this moment. So Elyse, questions that you may want to share with our panelists, and if you have any questions, please post it in the chat so we can follow up on you. Back to you, Elyse.
Yes, we have a second question for the panelists that we have ready, but I also just want to say too that Reverend Jackson, you brought up your ancestors, and two ancestors that are coming to mind out of what you just said, Abigail, are Howard Thurman's question to King after his assassination attempt is, Martin, where do you go from here? And of course, his work in his book became, where do we go from here, out of that work? And so that feels very, for such a time as this, is coming up again in a very similar way. We're also looking, as Angel Luis also was talking about, these unexpected, and some people may be expected, but for a lot of people, unexpected electoral trends that occurred in these elections, comparing the federal level with the local level, that in turn may reflect some signs of hope, even amid the perception of confusion. So wondering if y'all could help us dissect that a little bit so we also are more grounded with where we are with all that's going on. We have all this chaos of that is intentional to flood the zone of here's a whole bunch of things going on, and it's hard to get our heads on straight. Can you help ground us to where we are exactly in this moment? And Abigail, I'll invite you to talk about this first from that federal level, and Reverend Jackson, what you're seeing in your local community.
Yeah, I think you know, what's been said about this kind of interesting almost contradiction or comparison between what happened particularly in the presidential election versus what happened on the state level is something that it has been very interesting to me to take a look at. And so yeah, I think you're completely on point that in general, Americans, when it came to ballot initiatives, when it came to state measures that were getting passed alongside the presidential election at the exact same time, we're voting for values such as paid sick leave, minimum wage, climate resilience, increased access to healthcare, housing access, and reproductive rights, and also even shoring up their own right to vote. And so if we take a look into the actual states that did this, Alaska, Missouri, and Nebraska handily passed paid sick leave. All three were also called for Donald Trump. Alaska and Missouri increased their minimum wage, also were called for Donald Trump. Colorado, Nebraska, and Kentucky all rejected a bid to funnel state funding to private schools. Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, and Nevada all protected reproductive rights. And so this is a perfect example of how all the ballot initiatives that speak to the issues overwhelmingly went towards the values that I know that the United Church of Christ holds dear, which are values such as reproductive rights, values such as economic justice, increasing the minimum wage. And so when we're taking a look at that compared to the presidential election, I think what I have taken from this, and this is particularly through conversations with our colleagues, we are part of a coalition of faith groups that all have Get Out the Vote initiatives. And so after the Our Faith, Our Vote campaign wound down, we had a conversation with other similar faith groups that did Get Out the Vote campaigns across the country. And what came out of that conversation was a feeling that, you know, similar to what's already been said, there was a from the American people, there was a call for change. And when the American people want change, Kamala Harris, while she was, you know, a great candidate, the one thing that she could not offer was a break with the current administration because she was part of that administration. And so particularly when it came to things like the economy, while the economy definitely deeply improved over the Biden administration, that did not get felt on the personal level for everyone in this election. And so when you take a look at things like wage growth compared to prices, it tells a much different story than saying, oh, the economy is doing better. And so in an election cycle where the economy was something that both candidates focused on, when people are suffering, when people are living paycheck to paycheck, they don't want to be told the economy's great. They want to be told, I hear you, I understand, and we're going to change. And just simply because of Kamala Harris's position, given her relationship to the current administration, she wasn't in a position to say that. Whereas while the methods that the current president used included things like misinformation, he did position himself as a change candidate. And I think that was where a lot of people that's from where people voted. And so people wanted change and they voted for change. And I think that is the message that we've been taking when it comes to how to move forward. We're really trying to ensure that all of our work is grounded in the fact that we are fighting against the power and wealth grab of billionaires against normal people. And I think that type of fight is something that we really took from this election as a message that the American people sent, that they want folks to focus on their lived reality, and they want us to fight against the power of billionaires and the ultra rich. And so that's what we're trying to do with the work that we're doing, particularly in Congress surrounding this upcoming tax fight where unfortunately Republicans are trying to give tax cuts to the ultra wealthy and essentially steal from our lowest income neighbors. And so I'm happy to speak more on that, but I just wanted to give that as my thoughts when it came to the prior election.
The United States is and has always been highly anti-intellectual. And I think you're absolutely right. There was only so much that the Harris camp was handcuffed in what he could do. Because vice presidents are supposed to be seen and not heard anyway. And so running and trying to separate yourself and your policies from the guy that holds the office right now who's endorsing you, who bowed out so that you could do that, is nearly impossible. But I'm thinking about a quote that great African revolutionary Amilcar Cabral said, that always bear in mind that the people are not fighting for ideas, what's in the minds of people. And so it's problematic as him talking about the price of eggs, and he hadn't been to a grocery store to buy a dozen eggs in ever. And we knew what it was. I think that we were having an intellectual argument, and the United States, I don't know that we've ever been ready for an intellectual argument. I think that everything has been, and really you have to, and dumbing it down is the wrong thing, but breaking things down to a different level, a level that people can understand, and understand that, as you said, and then you demonstrated through all these referendums in different places, and we even had something in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, again, as red gets. But every now and then we have a ballot initiative that makes people think, wow, that happened here in Oklahoma. We never thought that would happen. But because we really need to outline some things that are just common sense that people need. And we keep having intellectual arguments, and the intellectual arguments, I don't want to say they're going over people's heads. Folks just not interested in them. They are, as simplistic as it is, they are interested in the price of eggs. They are, but they are also interested in their wages going up. They're also interested in health care. I mean, these are the things that people are facing right now. And though they are voting for these other people, but they continue to watch Fox News and all these other outlets. And so they're holding people in Oklahoma accountable like they're holding the people in DC accountable. Those are the folk that they're focused on, and they're not focused on the people here who could do more for what they need right now. But they can't ever turn their gaze to deal with what's here in front of them, with what would be good for them and what would be good for their kids and what would be good for everybody else, because they are living in this narrative where billionaires are trying to find waste in government. And they're not finding waste in all of their multi-billion-dollar contracts that they have. They're finding waste in people that are making $100 a month. And so it's simplistic, it's frustrating, but I think that we're having an argument on a different level, and that's why we're not connected. And so folks like AOC, some folks like AOC, but they see our president as a strong man. And it's the old thing that we were talking about before we came on, about the strong man, about the people wanting the king. They wanted a king until they got a king. And somebody said a couple of weeks ago to me that sometimes God's wrath looks like giving you what you ask for. And people asked for a king and they got it, and it turned out to be the wrath of God. And I'm afraid this is turning into the same kind of situation here.
And the thing is that when you trace the history of Israel, when you compare the judges, the regime of the judges vis-a-vis the king's regimes, you could see how the history of Israel uh, became corrupt because they become corrupt because of power, unlimited power. And in this globalized world, people tend to feel so uncertain regarding the direct results of the system and how the system could respond for their particular needs. And then the temptation is to look for some powerful figure that could then fix all the mess that people are living. And I think that a lesson that we can have on the things that are developed right, the way the things have developed now, is that not necessarily this crisis could be solved by having an overpowerful king trying to solve the things. Maybe we need to see our democratic system and try to fix from the ground up, overseeing the needs of the people, and to be aware of the suffering of the people, and then how from there we can build alternatives that could be in the well-being of everybody. So we have some question. Let me see the Q&A. Here, Kim Lu, she is asking, I assume it's a woman. Sorry if I misunderstood your name, please. How will the people come together as a cohesive group if we are separate groups to begin with differing priorities? That is the question posed by Kim. How will the people come together as a cohesive group if we are separate groups to begin with different priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really comforted by the fact that that when it comes to votes on ballot initiatives, regardless of your party, regardless of your affiliation, there seems to be a pretty strong stance for common sense legislation that helps people. And I think that's our common ground. I think I know that there was another comment in the chat surrounding hate and racism, and I think that's our greatest challenge. And I think particularly given the erosion of American education in this country, I think I really worry about issues surrounding critical thinking and being able to tell if information is misinformation or if it's properly sourced, that type of thing. And so I think those are our biggest challenges. But when it comes to common sense issues that improve people's lives, party really becomes nothing but a letter. And so that is what really comforts me. I think that while America seems politically divided, I don't think it has to be. I think if we come around with those common sense priorities and values surrounding everyone wants to be able to thrive, everyone wants to be able to survive, everyone wants to afford groceries, everyone wants to afford healthcare, everyone wants to be able to get a safe education without fear of guns for your children, right? All of these things are shared values regardless of your party. And I think that's really what we can hold on to.
And I think that you have to show up for and support one another. I mean, you have to do that. You don't have to be invited. You know, my kids and my grandkids are not being swept up by ICE. But you know what? I need to be in that fight. I have friends that's in that fight that are living in real fear, that are dealing with real issues, life and death issues, and that affects me. I need to be in that fight. I need to be in the fight with our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters. I need to be in the fight for people who are struggling. I need to be in the fight for women who are struggling. I need to be in the fight for everybody who's dealing with that. And they need to be in the fight with me. So some conversations are going to have to take place. And we're going to have to beat back some negativity in our own individual groups that would sow seeds and like, well, hey, why are you fooling with these people over here? And these people have never fooled with us. None of that stuff matters right now. We're in a fight for our life, and we're looking at them because they are a part of humanity, which means that they are a part of us. If we can't show up for the rest of us, I mean, literally, nobody will be able to show up for us, because we cannot do this in our own individual enclaves. It's going to take every single one of us coming together across different backgrounds, ethnicities, genders, sexualities, the whole 9 yards, and putting this together. That's the way we win. We fight together.
That is a great lead into another question that came up in the chat from Tim Bobbitt, who asked, what suggestions do you have for steps congregations and everyday folks can take when we are feeling overwhelmed and anxious? From either your perspectives, what are some helpful discernment tools and possible action strategies and steps that folks can take in this environment that is very overwhelming, and it seems like everything is under, because it is under threat and attack right now?
Well, again, I'm going back to conversations. I'm a conversationalist. I believe that you have to have a conversation, that you reach out and talk to people on purpose that are not you, that are not like you, that are not mirrors of who you are. That you have that you have conversations with other ethnicities, that you have conversations with people that have other other lifestyles, whatever it may be. Having conversations with people and trying to see what you have in common, and trying to see what you can do together, the work you can do together. We don't have to agree on 10 things together, but you know what? If we agree on 5, let's work on the 5 that we agree on. Let's work on that together.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think first, just validating that, it can be very overwhelming right now. I think starting with thinking, okay, who can I reach out to? Who can help me work on this? I think is definitely an instinct that will get you really far, as Rev Jackson said. I think particularly now, in a time of confusion and chaos for many, I think us leaning on each other is more important than ever. Also, when it comes to, you're feeling overwhelmed and how to respond, look to your congregation. I know that I have been really impressed with how congregations have ideas for how they want to engage. And you can use that and work with that as well. And if it's, if you don't find inspiration in your own congregation, look and see what other people are doing and how you can help them. And I think that's what, collective community really is. And it's so important right now. And the change that we can make when we come together, I think, is more valuable than anything we can do on our own.
Definitely. And as we continue sharing questions from participants, Mary Shaw Bradshaw said, and I quote, I try to keep my focus as a pastor and as a Christian on my faith without being too political. Some of our congregants still love and support President Trump, while I pray for him to change for his own sake as much as ours. Maybe some Republican pastor can say otherwise, but how can I maintain? And I was that was a comment by myself. Sorry that I didn't quote exactly what she is writing. But the question from Pastor Mary Jo is, how can I maintain that balance without being hypocritical? So it comes down to engage in difficult conversations, in difficult prayer, looking for common places for justice. How can you suggest to address this?
I am blessed that I have served my congregation for 28 years. So everybody there now, they know who I am. If you're sitting in the pews, you know who I am. You know what I'm going to say a lot of the times. You know what I feel. And so I have latitude to say a lot of things that I understand a lot of my colleagues cannot say, because they serve in congregations with a great deal more political diversity than I have. However, you can't get around the gospel must be the central thing. And your argument is not with me. Your argument is now with the Bible. It's now with Jesus. If you're preaching what Jesus said in Matthew 22 or Matthew 25, if you're preaching what Jesus said in Luke 4, as I said earlier when talking about my canon within a canon, that's what Jesus said. That's what the Bible says. This is thousands of years old right here. So this has nothing to do with Donald Trump or anybody else, but this has to do with the Bible. And now, if you're willing to set that aside for some politics in the 21st century, that's a decision that you made. But that's not gospel. And I've always rejected the title, the social gospel, because I don't know a gospel that's not social. I mean, when you look at what Jesus said and what he did, when you look at how he lived, it's absolutely social and it's absolutely political. And Jesus was living in and fighting against the Roman Empire. And I keep going back to that empire. This is an empire here that we're dealing with. And we have Caesars that we may not call them Caesars. We may call them other things here in the United States and in other places in the world. But we are dealing with an empire that must be presented with some truth that's older and deeper than us. And that's what we find in the gospel of Jesus.
Yeah, I would just say, in response to that, I'm lifting up Rev Elise's great comment in the chat. I think that plus what Rev Jackson just said about how we speak to issues and causes, not parties. I think it really sums up what I was going to say too. I think yeah, not being too political, I know is something. We have a lot of purple churches, and so it's something that is definitely weighs heavy on UCC ministers' minds as well. And I think navigating that by centering faith, I know that they have found success with that, centering their faith, centering Bible stories, centering the gospel is something where you can meet people in a way that they wouldn't otherwise be met if you said the same message without centering on the gospel. And so I think just, yeah, keeping that at the heart of everything and doing your best. I know that it's tough out there, but I appreciate all work that you can do for that. Because I know growing up in a church that tried to, as much as they could, speak to social issues in the pulpit, it completely impacted me personally. It made me grow into the person I am. And so I appreciate all your good work on that.
To you, Elyse.
I was curious about our time. Are we having enough time to take some more questions, or where do you think we are?
I think that maybe we can have the question that you just shared with us, as we were preparing this webinar, and maybe one other question from our friends.
That sounds great. It feels very resonant with what we've already been talking about, is sort of this idea around separation of church and state. And there's a bit of confusion going on even within this current administration. And for me, I'm just going to put some of my own opinion in this question as I ask it, but that there's a lot of people who are very loud saying what Christianity is, which Reverend Jackson is also talking about as well, versus how many others interpret the gospel message. There was the interesting exchange I saw as well between the Pope of the Catholic Church, his response to J.D. Vance, and his own response back and forth of, especially around immigration and what the Bible says about welcoming our neighbor. And we were once strangers in a strange land, and all of those sort of things. So I'm wondering if you have thoughts on the ideas of separation in church and state, what that brings up for you. For some, we've been hearing we shouldn't be involved in politics at all, we being the church. How dare we? We need to keep it all separate all the time. As well as we've got this other threat of people kind of Christian nationalism saying we're kind of taking over in this sort of, in my opinion, a distorted understanding of what the gospel is. And so there's both those things kind of going on. So I'm just offering up, what does that make you, what does this bring up for you, these dynamics of church and state going on here?
Right. Yeah. This idea of separation of church and state comes up a lot, mainly because through the DC office, we do a number of trainings for any member who is interested in raising their voice and speaking to their members of Congress. And one of the first questions we'll get asked is this, right? I thought the church was supposed to stay out of politics, separation of church and state. And I think where people get confused is they start to individualize the idea of the separation of church and state. Separation of church and state came in because first, the church as an institution wanted religious freedom. They wanted to be able to worship without the oversight and the, unfortunately, given our history, the potential oppression of the state. And then in exchange, there was also a history of the institution of the church, not any one person, but the institution of the church influencing the state in a way that was really truly corruption. And so when we talk about keeping the separation of church and state, we're really trying to really ensure that those two institutions stay separate. But when it comes to your individual rights as a religious person, you have as much rights as any other American citizen to speak to your politics, particularly when speaking to Congress or speaking to people in power. And so just as any constituent or voter can call up their congressperson and ask for a meeting and meet with them about any issue they want, you as a person of faith can do the same thing. And also you as a minister can bring congregants to do that same thing in Congress. Where the only idea of separation of church and state is at the institutional level. When it comes to individuals, we are acting out our constitutional rights to speak to our Congress people, to speak to the administration, to speak to our elected officials. And if anything, people of faith are instructed, if you follow the ways of Jesus Christ, you follow someone who spoke truth to power constantly. And so followers of Christ should really feel quite empowered to go into Congress and meet with their elected officials, because that's what Jesus did and has taught us to do. And so I just want to, just emphasize that separation of church and state is institutional, not individual, and everyone has the right to engage in government, particularly and especially people of faith.
I want to echo that. Folks don't understand it from a historical point of view, what separation of church and state is and why we have it, and how many of our colonies before they became the United States had established state religions that were supported by tax dollars. And, that's the same model that many of them brought from Europe. That's the model that was in England with the Church of England, that was in Germany with what is now the Lutheran Church, and then France with the Catholic Church, and so on and so forth. And an American experiment was to get away from that type of model. But there's still a basic misunderstanding of what Christianity is. And people here in the United States have reduced Christianity to personal piety. And they have taken the community out of the gospel, which really is a very Romanized way of looking at it, because the gospel existed. It wasn't born in Rome. It existed before it became Roman. And when it became Roman, it took on all of the traits of the Roman Empire, and including the power and all the things like that. But the gospel is Palestinian. The gospel is more egalitarian. The gospel is about us and not necessarily me. And over the centuries, we have turned Christianity from that Palestinian model and just taken on all the traits of an empire model gospel which is about power, earthly power, and about force. And that's why people would conquer with a gun in one hand, a sword in one hand, and a Bible in the other. And I don't believe that you make people. And I wrote a post the other day. It was our education secretary here in Oklahoma is trying to make people be patriotic, quite honestly. And if you have to make somebody be patriotic, are they really patriotic? When you think about it, I mean, that should be something that comes from the inside. And the same way about our conversion experiences and about our faith, it should be something that that happens internally in us, that happens because the wheels turn on the inside of us, and we take on that kind of persona. And it is about us. And the gospel is just about me. It's not the gospel. It must include us. It must include other people. You cannot be a Christian by yourself. You never could, and you never will. It takes all of us.
Thank you very much, Reverend. We will take in then one more question, and then we will wrap up this webinar. Of course, we will continue with reflections through the Justice Initiative Program at the National Benevolent Association, as well as our friends in the United Church of Christ and its ministries. So from Sherry Dickerson, I want to share this question. There are several faith-based organizations that have established political action committees to help support electoral campaigns. Is this something Disciples of Christ congregation should consider? Also, should we strategically encourage and uplift legislation or candidates? That is the question from Sherry Dickerson.
Yeah, so I would say just and I'm happy to also put this link in the chat, but yeah, without a PAC, the main thing is that congregations, since they are 501c3, they can't endorse candidates or political parties. So just putting that out there. But yeah, so I know that some people have chosen for their churches to become PACs. You know, my experience as congressional staff and just speaking on that perspective, I think having the ability to, particularly if you're able to have like any sort of lobbying opportunities, that's always impactful. That's unfortunately, given Citizens United and a number of other Supreme Court cases, Congress runs off of listening to and giving, honestly, much too much access for private lobbyists. So if you have the funds and means to become a PAC and get in on that, feel free. I think there are though other ways to be involved in Congress in a way that you don't need to have a PAC. Like, for example, I know a lot of churches are creating affiliate programs where they basically have groups of congregants who are trained up to be liaisons to their member of Congress and then speak to and build relationships with their member of Congress on a regular basis. You don't need to have a PAC to do that. You can just go ahead and do that. And they're able to then use that ongoing relationship to ask and not only share their values, but make pretty significant public policy priorities asks of those members of Congress. And so building your power in that way can be really effective. And I'm also happy to speak to anyone. I can give my email in the chat with strategizing for this, because the United Church of Christ, through our office, we're working with some other program ministers on launching this type of affiliate program. So if you're interested, just let us know, and we're very happy to help you out. So I'll put that in the chat. Actually, I'm not sure if I can access everyone's chat, but I'll make sure it's circulated afterwards.
How about you, Pastor? From the church and a pastoral point of view, what do you think about political action committees and the role of the church, maybe in the halls of Congress and so forth?
Well, I have not thought about a PAC. I did not think that was the way, because I was disappointed when I saw conservative congregations doing that. It was not the way that I thought that it should go. But I know that for instance, I called my senators last week. I called them often. I have lobbied the legislature here in Oklahoma as an educator. as well. I believe in that. I believe in making contact by calling, by visiting, by doing lobbying with individual groups that you happen to be a part of, like a teachers union or something like that. I must admit, I had not thought about turning the congregation into a pack like that. I need to weigh some of that, but I've always encouraged, and certainly still encourage, us to do all those things through other means.
And you know, we as church people, as Christians, we are citizens too. So we have the right
Yes,
to
yes,
raise our voice, to be prophetic on the different issues at hand, and we need to be responsible citizens. So I think
yes,
that we have the same right as any other citizen. Maybe
we
what
do.
we need to be careful is when we engage into power. And how do we behave as Christians when we get into positions of power? Are we getting power in order to serve the poor, the needy, the widow, the orphan, the people that the least of these, as in Matthew chapter 25, verse 30, verse 4 till 46, or are we using power to make ourselves rich and powerful and not looking for the needs of the people? So the judgment will fall to us if we do not follow the values of the gospel and the well-being of the people. But of course, I think that
Amen.
as citizens, we can advocate for the rights of the people, and we as pastors see the need of the people. Who I think that we have that possibility to advocate for the specific needs of the people. So I think that our time is up. I thank you so much to our speakers, Pastor Jesse and Abigail. We have been blessed by your work and honored with your presence here today with us. Thank you to my dear friend, Reverend Dr. Elyse Berry, for giving me the blessing to have her here as co-moderator of this discussion. We encourage you to stay tuned for more discussions. This is the first of several discussions that we want to have regarding justice initiatives. For example, we will have another webinar on May the 5th, 2025, regarding digging deep into justice, how churches and nonprofits can engage into justice issues, advocating and seeing campaigns and looking for the rights of the people from the ground up, dealing with the needs of the people. So stay tuned for that webinar that is coming up. In that webinar, we will continue going deeper into a prophetic call to justice and to present elements to advocate for our communities and defending fundamental civil and human rights. Another way you can be involved and stay informed of our work is to sign up for our newsletter at nbacares.org/newsletter. You can mark some check boxes that you will find in our webpage to let us know if you're interested in several topics that are there in our webpage. And finally, we ask you for your support. Your generous gifts help NBA continue its work of creating communities of compassion and care and supporting the work of justice and equity. We are ever grateful for these blessings. You can donate online at nbacares.com/donate. And for my friend Elyse and the UCC Council for Health and Human Services, is there any event you want to advertise here, Elyse?
Yes, we have our CHSM annual gathering that'll be in Boston, March 10th through the 13th, and we will see both Angel Luis and Abigail there offering workshops around advocacy and justice. So we're really excited about that. And also, if you're interested in leadership programming that really centers social justice and care and community experience, I encourage you to look into our NOLAO Leadership Institute, which I have the honor of directing. And I also just wanted to say one quick note that about the what you can do is y'all are showing up here today, and to not take that for granted, and that we don't have to do everything and know everything that's going on all the time. That will be very overwhelming. For me, it's really so much of what Reverend Jesse was talking about is being in relationship and then showing up as best we can. It might be a meal, even for somebody who's going to protest somewhere, or donating money, or might be showing up there myself, writing to Congress, calling, etc. But just finding ways you can show up. Don't have to have it all figured out. Not every project has to be your whole thing, but knowing,
Right.
being guided by those for whom it is, and being in relationship with them and showing up however you can. So wanted to put that out there too, because the daily, the local, your own life, your own web of influence, finding what that is and really leaning into it. It's very much Jesus spoke truth to power, and then he broke bread with everyone, right? And
Amen.
he was so.
So we will say goodbye, quoting the prophet Isaiah in chapter 1, verse 17. Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, and plead the widow's cause. It is our commitment to work for the least of these and to continue advocating for justice and for the well-being of our people. Thank you very much. Have a nice night. Blessings to you all, and thank you, my dear friends, for this wonderful conversation regarding Voices of Democracy after 2024 elections, a path to discernment and prophetic action. May God bless you always. Bye-bye.